about, swearing in and.
I've been sworn at already.
All right, and ethics and all that sort of stuff
Yep.
that we need to do, so we're good to go. I do want to offer, right, this can sometimes be a little bit confusing on what we're allowed to do and what we're not allowed to do according to state law. So anytime if you have questions, whether it's here, right, interrupt, or why are we doing this, or why can't we look at this, blah, blah, feel free to sort of stop where we are and ask those questions, or afterwards or before, or whatever. So
Thanks for the permission. I'm sure I'll have many, many stupid questions.
there are no stupid questions, right? That's what they say. All right. First item on the agenda, we'll have Andrew sort of go over the hybrid rules.
Yep. Sure. So good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us for the Cpdc hearing of Monday, July 15th. I am Community Development Director Andrew McNichol. From staff next to me is Senior Planner Olivia Knightley. From the board tonight, everybody appears to be in person, missing one. They may show up soon, but we'll start. Chair John Weston, Heather Klisch, Member Heather Klisch, Member Hillary Mateve, Member John Arena, and Associate Tom Armstrong. The way this meeting is set up is a hybrid setup, so we have in-person attendees and potentially some Zoom members joining later on. If you are in person and you have a public comment, please raise your hand and the chair will acknowledge you. Please introduce your name and your address for the record. And on Zoom, please look for the raise hand feature found under reactions, and we'll look to point you out to the chair as well. And similarly, please just introduce your name and address for the record. The board is going to follow their typical process in which the applicant will present their case and application to the board. The board will provide comment and question amongst themselves to the applicant, and then open up to public comment. Otherwise, all I can add is that this meeting is being recorded and broadcasted by RCTV on the local channels, and will be up on the local YouTube. I think that's it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. So first item on the agenda is, we have got three all scheduled together. We'll go through two that we had a continued public hearing at for a definitive subdivision application at Zero Harold Ave, or otherwise known as 0 Van Norden Road, and the applicant has requested that we continue that to September 9th.
The applicant is working through the proof plan process. A lot of comments were involved around meeting proof, and they're still hopeful their intent and full design can meet that, so they're working through.
Okay. Well, I'll move to continue the public hearing for the definitive subdivision application for 0 Harold Avenue, aka 0 Van Norden Road, the 0 Harold Avenue LLC to Monday, September 9th. We don't need to do the time anymore, right? I'll second that.
All right. Discussion. All those in favor? Other 7 p.m. item is a major modification to a definitive subdivision at Grandview Road, Michael Salomon. That the applicant requested that we continue that till Monday, August 12th.
Yep. Similarly, working through some of their back-end details and process.
Okay, so I'll move to continue the public hearing for the major modification to definitive subdivision at Grandview Road Extension by Michael Salomon to Monday, August 12th. I'll second that.
All right, discussion. All those in favor? All right.
Question on process. By what mechanism are the extensions granted? The duration wise, is that by the applicant's request, the interval, or?
Yes, right? I mean, they typically ask for a specific date. Sometimes we will, right, our agenda will be full, and so we'll ask them, to be put on the following agenda. There is a time frame for some of these types of applications, and so they need to, right, it's sort of a give and take on, them asking for requests to extend, and then we need to ask to move the end date
Okay.
also,
Thank you.
sometimes.
Thank you.
I don't think that's the case on these
That
two.
is not the
Yes,
case here.
right.
Generally, with the written agreements and acceptances of continuances, the deadlines naturally extend, but we do find ourselves sometimes requesting the specific extension.
Yeah, we've done that before, so that we're not back up against a wall and needing to approve something because they've continued so many times to approve it on a time frame that isn't workable.
Thank you.
And then the other 7 p.m. public hearing is a special permit for a freestanding sign under Business B at 431 Main Street, Chase Bank.
Just
Sure.
because this is a special permit, we do need to read the legal
Okay.
notice.
Yep.
Oh, okay. I'm going here.
Do you want to do that? Or,
So,
I got it.
you got it?
Here.
yeah, fantastic.
Notice of public hearing notice is hereby given that pursuant to sections 4.3, 853, 859, and 86 of the Town of Reading zoning bylaws and in accordance with MGL Chapter 40A, Section 9, the Community Planning and Development Commission will hold a public hearing on Monday, July 15th, 2014 at 7 p.m. in the Select Board Meeting Room in Reading Town Hall, 16 Lowell Street, Reading, Massachusetts, and through remote and online measures to consider the application pending by Chase Bank for the property located at 431 Main Street, Assessors Map 17, lots 63 and 65 for a special permit to allow a freestanding sign under the Business B base zoning regulations. Copy of the application and accompanying plans are available to the public at the town hall by appointment or on town website in Thursday prior to the hearing. Don't think I need to go any further.
With a slight modification, right? It was Monday, July 15th, 2024.
Sorry.
I think that you read that. Okay, so that's fine.
Sorry. Okay.
All right, we have the applicant?
Yes.
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 If we can ask you, if you're going to say something, if you can stand at the podium, because that way, right, the people at home can see. So,
Good evening. My name is Heather Dedko. I'm 27 Old Meeting House Road in Auburn, Mass. And I'm a consultant with Philadelphia Sign Company, who is the installer for the Chase Bank signage. You may remember or recognize me from a few months ago. I was before the board in April to discuss the wall signs, which did not need a special permit, but the planning board approval. And I presented that case in April. So this is a separate application for consideration by the board to install a monument sign at the new Chase Bank branch on Main Street. The sign is proposed at 12 square foot on a brick base, 4 foot 2 inch overall height, halo illumination, a 5 foot setback from Main Street and a 20 foot setback from Washington Street. So the sign would be located on Main Street, perpendicular to Main Street, towards the corner of Main and Washington. Business B, ground signs allowed by special permit. I did a little survey of the area. It's a very congested area there. It does seem to be that there are some ground signs there. One in particular across the street, it appears to be like a multi-tenant building. And there were a few gas station signs that I saw, and the Santander Bank I saw as well, but I believe that that's in a different zone, not Business B zone. So I think it's a little discussion about whether the sign is appropriate there or not, but Chase did want to present it to the board to see if there's some consideration to approve that. It is a new branch to Reading, so they're looking to maximize their exposure for new customers in the new branch. And they were approved for 2 wall signs, one on the front and one on the rear elevation. And this would just help maximize their visibility there on the corner for motorists. That's about what I have.
all right, great. So I'll start out I did notice one thing, so with, or at least the way that I read the plans, right, with the halo lit sign, which is allowed, right, the definition of halo lit is essentially that the letters are opaque,
Correct.
and I think on the plan it says that they it does not.
Okay, so we did,
Yeah, it says they're translucent.
It says translucent blue faces, right?
Right.
okay. Oh, halo illuminated, I see that, so we did submit, Olivia, did we submit a rendering that had more
Yes,
specific
the
language to halo?
There is language on one of the more recent submittals that states halo lighting specifically. I can't recall if it says it's opaque or not.
So
I think that we would want to be clear that that's
Sure.
the requirement.
Sure.
There have been many times where that
Right.
wasn't quite communicated the right way,
Right.
so, right.
And I think we had this discussion at the last meeting actually, because the,
We
yeah,
had a lot.
right, because the letters usually are acrylic. So it's a standard, it's like just a standard description of the lettering, so when they need to change it to halo, they don't go through every specific line and rewrite it. But if that's, I fully understand that that's a requirement. So we can have the drawings noted specifically opaque face. And I also believe that the letters on the building are not acrylic, they're metal. Didn't we discuss
We
that?
did discuss this, yes.
I remember that it was
Yes.
a similar issue, and
Yeah.
I can't remember if they ended up being acrylic or
They-
metal, but
it did say
a
they were
concern
metal
is that if it's
Yes.
acrylic,
Yes.
yeah, if it's acrylic,
Yeah.
it has to not let
Correct,
any
right.
light through.
Yep.
We've had that
Right.
error in town.
And I think
Yeah.
we're all in agreement in that, I fully understand that. But I want to bring that up because if you want some consistency, we could recommend that the lettering be the same material on the sign that's on the building.
If it's in fact metal and opaque, yes. I would support that.
If that's an appropriate material to have on a monument ground sign as opposed to the, right?
No,
You know, like, we don't want to say, oh, put
mandate it,
metal
yeah.
on the ground sign if there's some reason why you wouldn't
Okay.
want, metal on that sign in your sign expertise, right? There's a choice
Sort of
at one
technical
point,
reason.
right? We don't want to override
okay,
that choice. We, as Heather said,
Yeah.
I think we just care that it's,
Yes, yeah.
that it's opaque,
yes.
so.
They fully will abide by the opaque, whether it's the acrylic letter or a metal letter. I did show a sign, I think I sent a picture that will show it at night.
You did.
And the sign itself is 12 square foot, but the lettering is about 5 to 6 square foot. So that's the size that will be illuminated.
And actually, it was the image that gave me a little bit of pause. And I don't know if it's just the quality of the image, but the blue logo there on the right, that top little box, looks different there than it does on my computer. It didn't appear opaque on my computer, so that's when I looked at that, but wait, what are the materials? But I mean, it looks okay, it looks different there, it doesn't like.
And so, I guess the other thing that, just for the board's purpose, right, there are, because we don't have these that often, right, there are specific things that are identified of what we should be looking at when we grant a special permit for a monument sign, right? Abutting properties, abutting properties are not necessarily impacted by the placement. No detrimental impact to traffic and pedestrian safety, and we can take specific attention to the character of the neighborhood, the principal use of the business, the location, the sign in relationship to the location of parking, landscaping in the area, and other things, but that gives us some guidance on what the concerns were when we put this special permit together.
Do you prefer chair or John?
John is fine, yes.
When I first saw the image, my first question was line of sight, particularly with regard to traffic converging on the square. The top-down image doesn't really tell the story. Maybe the group has actually done a site view, but my first thought is as a monument sign, you do have an occluded view to oncoming traffic. And whether or not the applicant, I hesitate to suggest a remedy because I don't know what's feasible and what the group is entitled to suggest. But its proximity to the radius of the turn is what contributes to it. If it were pulled farther, I guess this would be south, some distance, it helps. But again, I'm not trying to suggest that prescriptively, just that where it is presently, there is some occlusion of line of sight to north-south traffic.
So I will say, right, because that was the very first thing I thought of and looked at. And if you can go to the second slide, because I think this may help. Yeah, and zoom in on that. Yeah. So right,
Yeah.
John, with this we see where the stop line is in the crosswalk and its relationship to the sidewalk.
What do those red lines represent, Matt?
Property line.
Maybe it's my eyes. There are two red lines in the radius turn. What are those?
That is correct. I think in the site plan, we had identified that, and there was a radius there that had extended beyond what was corrected, similar to McDonald's.
So the deed doesn't match the drawing. Is that correct? Is that why there's two lines?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The deed doesn't match the drawing. Okay. I'm just bringing up. The group can make any assessment it wants to the degree.
But the curb line, right, is the gray line,
Mm-hmm.
right? That's
Oh, I'm sorry,
further out.
that's the curb.
So that's the curb line,
I'm sorry.
right? The other is a property line that no one, right? You couldn't find that on the ground if you wanted to.
And this full sidewalk width is maintained, just to be clear.
So
So the gray line to the left of the vertical red line is in fact the curb. Okay, so that would seem to give you adequate line of sight.
that's what I
think so.
thought. I mean,
Thank you,
especially
that helps.
since it's on the right. It's on the right. You're gonna right. It's not. You don't have to look around it doing left turns. And on the left turn, if you're coming on Washington, you're on the far side of the street, and that won't even.
That helps, thank you. I think that helps quite a bit, thank you.
Yes, that was a question I looked at and had as well, and I was thinking about it from the perspective of people turning right who might not see pedestrians or kids on bikes, but I think it's okay.
Yeah.
I'm not
yeah.
gonna repeat everything you said, but I think the
Is
sight
it
line seems to
Is
be
it a
clear.
subjective assessment of this board, or are there safety? The worst things in the world are zoning and signage, but are there safety guidelines that this group observes, or is it purely observation and common sense?
It's observation and common sense. I mean, there is like a sight triangle. I think at one point that Reading Police tried to pass a bylaw about
Possible.
yeah. So right there, so there are some rules that you could put together, but I think it's common sense because stop lines are not necessarily always in the right place. I mean, they're engineering wise they're in the right place, but from functionality,
I think that's fine.
we usually do more on common sense.
Yeah, and it's back, I almost call it inland, but it's inside the sidewalk, it's inside the crosswalk, I think it looks okay.
For what it's worth, though, on this location discussion, I've gone back to look at the previous landscape plan
Mhm.
because there's a good amount of landscape on this site that was approved, and it is directly behind a fairly large tree there, sitting here. So I don't know if that impacts necessarily the visibility of the sign, not necessarily in a safety way, but in terms of it being a viable sign location, maybe.
Is that a pre-existing tree, or is that one that's been planted?
That is going to be
it should
Well,
be
which we
planted.
can adjust in.
But-
But if tree is
But
high.
the tree, right, I mean, the
Right.
tree
Yeah.
limbs should not be 4.5 feet.
I can't imagine.
Yeah, I
it's
can't,
gonna be
yeah,
so
yeah.
just
Or
note
do you-
that it came from.
Is it, can you tell what kind of tree that is?
That is. I didn't put that far.
Sorry.
No, I have it.
Do you know which side of the tree that would be?
I do not. No.
I think did it show the sign
Yeah.
there?
This
But
is
yeah, that's the sign.
That was
It
an
shows
estimate
that.
at the time.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
I believe it's just gonna be a crabapple tree, if I'm not mistaken. Either that or a maple. It's not a.
As long as it's not some evergreen, right?
I mean, that's the thing, and it is up to, it's up to the proponent, but, I guess there'll be visibility coming from the south because the whole
Mhm.
building is there. And
Yeah.
if the idea is to have visibility coming from the north, the tree won't be in the way. But the tree must stay.
Right, right.
Is there gonna be signage to the McDonald's side of Chase Bank?
No. No. Well, there's a wall sign on the front of the building that faces the parking lot, which is just next to a McDonald's. But that's on the building.
On the building, and how big?
Yeah, well,
Oh.
it's,
Needs another 12 feet or what?
no, that's, their wall signs were 37 square foot each.
And that's what we approved last time.
Mhm.
Other questions or comments from the board?
You guys covered.
Questions from the public, either in person or online?
Anybody on Teams?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Tony DeRosa, 130 John Street. Just a reminder to the board, as this is a special permit, it is well within your purview to assign a time that this sign would need to be off at night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Were there times assigned to the other lighting also, to the building lighting? Did you remember?
I believe it was the one on the rear elevation. There was a time,
So
because
on the north facade fronting Washington Street, which is future residential, we're conditioned to 11.
Yep.
Just the one sign?
Because it was facing residential. And this would also be technically facing residential,
Future residential.
future residential, land residential, right?
I'll say I have both. I could see going either way. It sort of sometimes is depressing if you drive through the middle of town. The middle of town, right, which is this is pretty close to it, and everything is just shut off.
Yeah.
But it will be abutting. It will be showing facing some residential properties. So I don't feel strongly either way. And Andrew or Olivia, was there anyone?
There's nobody on Zoom. To add to the lighting, there's not in the prior illumination plan, there's almost 0-foot candles in that area.
And what's the output of this? Do we know what the output of the sign, the halo sign is?
I don't think I know that.
Can't be much. Let's see. Yeah.
Sometimes they spec that out for me and sometimes they don't. I don't see them.
converting to the Halo. We can condition at least some specs and details on it.
So typically, right, when we go through, like, we have a certificate of appropriateness, or we have an approval,
Yes.
right? This is a special permit. What's the document that we're approving? I mean,
Yeah.
it's just a special permit. And so
Yes.
do we
Yeah.
offer conditions to it, or?
Absolutely. We have the draft special permit, and I included language
Oh,
of
is it in here?
certificate.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
I hope it made it. If not our mistake and apologies. But it virtually actually details the same language you had mentioned on the special permit criteria, the sign area, and details the setbacks in the material. And I had tonight added a quick condition to ensure that the lighting specifications of the illumination and lettering themselves ensure it's opaque lettering. We could similarly look at the timing or
Yeah, can we add something that either, like, in their module, if they can like have a dimmer or a timer that maybe needs to be modified in the future, but like allows for modification based on neighborhood impact, I don't know.
Yeah, I don't
Is this
know
like
that I know
having
that
a-
these signs are on a controllable temperature, but
I don't know. I know that they have accommodated that, to go on a dimmer.
I think that would like reduce the impact potentially and like.
Yeah, not,
Yeah.
I'm just, not knowing the full temperature, how bright it's going to be, that would give flexibility in the absence of knowing that information, right?
Right.
And I don't think we did get that decision document.
Yeah. It's up there right now.
it is. Just trying to think of a minimum standard to try to set.
Do you have a recommendation for what you see?
I'm sorry?
Do you have a like what minimum temperature?
It's not even the temperature necessarily, it's more the like the lumens and like.
Yeah, I guess it's right,
Lumens.
right.
'Cause
I
the
don't,
color
I don't know what the
temperature
exact
stays the
lumen
same.
output would be on that, based on that square footage.
So
I do know that there is a technology that will dim it and brighten it depending on the brightness of the day. So if you have a cloudy day, it'll brighten up a little bit. Then when it's sunnier, it'll lessen they have that technology.
is there something that, and that you can set it at potentially for like, once it hits midnight, it's like half lumens or something?
I think they would be probably, I don't know, see, I'm not an electrician, so,
Right.
and all the
Yeah.
signs are so different that unless I have a specific, not to mention other towns, but in Burlington, like they have a specific lumen output that they put conditions on all the signs, so we know that, and we work up the numbers to adhere to that.
Yeah, okay.
But I know that they would not be adverse to shutting it off because they agreed for that. But if you'd like to have it on, they will have site lighting there because they have a 24-hour ATM. So there is site lighting there. So the shut off at 11, I don't think would be an issue.
My guess with the lighting in that area, you're probably gonna be able to see it even if it's not lit up.
I agree also. I don't think turning it off at 11 is going to make that whole intersection
Right. Yes.
dark and spooky.
Yes. Yeah. You're right.
And lonely, and I understand what you were saying too.
So should we just condition it to be turned off
Yeah.
at 11? I think is probably the easiest for everyone, or whenever the other signs go off, whatever time that is.
Right, consistent with the.
Yeah.
Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah, okay. All right, any further comments, questions? Oh, sure.
Question for Andrew, what's the document you're typing into right now? I didn't see it in the package that was distributed.
Sorry, it must not have made its way into the drive, but this is the draft special permit and certificate of appropriateness. In this case, I called it a virtually draft decision.
Is this commonly in the folder or something
Yes,
produced?
yes.
immediately?
Yeah. Technical difficulties this
Thursday.
this month.
Yep, apologies.
And so what we do generally is just read through that, make sure it has everything that we want it to include.
Yep, so this includes the materials submitted to date, the findings, which is really the detail of the application, in this case sign area, location, setbacks, special permit criteria, and then the conditions as well of approval should application be approved, which in a sign is fairly standard.
Should we, I'm gonna recommend maybe taking number 5 off. That just seems, for this particular, because it's just the one sign that's a monument sign,
Yeah.
it's a little confusing.
And that
About
condition
what
would have
that
been
would
probably
wind up,
in the
that would have
other
been
one.
on the other one,
Because it's
yes,
standard,
yeah,
right?
yeah. All right. Motion from anyone?
I will move to approve the special permit and certificate of appropriateness for the freestanding monument sign at 431 Main Street, Chase Bank.
Second that?
Discussion? All those in favor?
Abstain.
Okay, and one abstain.
I just hold a Chase credit card.
You don't have to, tell us why you're abstaining,
I
but.
think that rises to the level.
I think you're paying for some other sign.
Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you very
okay,
much.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's gonna be like the shortest meeting ever. But I know we have a discussion.
Yeah, it's like summer meeting. Although we've had some long summer meetings, so,
Probably ease the new guys into it.
yeah, exactly.
All right, I guess the first item, actually, that's not on here, but planning updates and other topics, I do wanna bring up, right, so we typically reorganize the board in July or August. I think actually last year we did it in August because
Yeah.
of some summer schedules. And so we wanna do this or do that again, have that discussion. I wanna bring it up at this meeting. We'll have it on the agenda for next meeting. You know, I'll say, right, I've been the chair the past year. Typically the secretary, whoever was the secretary becomes, you know, we've historically nominated as the chair. That's not an option this year. So I'm not all that eager to stay on, but would. I don't expect anyone else to put their thoughts out there right now, but be thinking about it for discussion next time.
Do you want discussion on that
If you,
now?
yeah, if you, I wasn't, I'm putting it out there so that if anyone wants to discuss, we can do that, but don't feel obliged.
So I'll just throw something out for discussion, for consideration by my colleagues here, is that we're in the middle of one of the biggest projects we've had since I've been on CPDC. 40R was big, and if you could be enticed, I might consider nominating you to stay on at least until we do MBTA communities, just for consideration, no commitment, but for consideration. And for consideration by the board also.
Those are good thoughts.
All right. MBTA communities.
Sure. So we just wanted to give a quick update in terms of the process, because I'm sure what obviously was that we had pushed what was the July 10th scheduled conversation and forum further towards our pre-scheduled 31st meeting date, but we wanted to do that because what we heard in June was substantial, and I think you may have even mentioned it at the meeting that it wasn't necessarily the best avenue in terms of getting into the details of those concepts themselves. So we wanted to reconsider how these events were going to be managed and pushed. So we're headed towards the July 31st forum workshop-esque meeting date with some new concepts, evolved concepts that we'll be pushing out. But the intent is to have, I guess, more facilitated conversation around these concepts. So we've narrowed the concepts down first and foremost and tried to be fairly consistent with what we've heard. And then the intent is to have the forum do a quick presentation, but then break into small roundtable discussions, 3 or 4 roundtable discussions that can hold between 10 to 20 people with more specific questions and context around the concepts themselves to get more direct actionable feedback in the short term, because we are in the midst of summer and upcoming towards the town meeting deadline. So in the meantime, through that date, we should have the affordability analysis coming any day now. If it wasn't in my email today, we'll be getting that to add to that conversation as well. And on top of that, the consultants that we're working with are working towards more visual and maps for items such as the unit capacity and other additional areas of context for these concepts, just to help again guide those conversations. This is intended actually this time as an in-person meeting only, just given how that facilitation and small group discussions is shaping out. And then from there, determine the appropriate next style of engagement.
So I do think, for to help John along, I know that he's been engaged, but and I think Guy has as well, and I assume that he's going to end up watching this, right? I guess I think right. I don't know how much you've been engaged, but I do think it's worthwhile to sort of like go back through how we ended up getting to where we are right now. And I'll start off, and feel free to fill in the gaps or a different perspective, right? Right, because it's been a journey. So right, we started last summer. Is that? Yeah, last summer.
The engagement process.
Yeah. So right, I guess when we went back and looked through a lot of the information that we had collected in the past about housing, whether it was a housing production plan or even other efforts in the past, right? There was never, we didn't feel like there was enough information to really, right? Because we hadn't done a master plan for
2006.
yeah. So really too long ago, right? And so, right, and especially during the summer, right? The idea was let's go out and ask people, like, what do they really want? Andrew led that, gathered a lot of information, whether surveys or in-person conversations, had some smaller group meetings. I know I participated in a couple of those, and what we heard during that time was interest in, what I know that you've seen in others, right? The what are we calling it now? The mixed residential, but basically, right, smaller multifamily, sort of surrounding the downtown. And so that's what went out in the first sort of mapping and all, right? We heard very quickly that wasn't what people wanted. And I think even looking back at it, there's some challenges to the zoning, right? Because zoning is tricky. First, you need to come up with a vision, and then you need to come up with the actual zoning language to make that happen in the way that you want it. And in that context, it was, because of the sizes of all the parcels in and around, really hard to make work in a way that it would not be onerous in some situations. Inconsistent with the community, that's what I should say. So, right, you looked at scaling it back, brought that out, heard that, that is still, even at a smaller scale, that's not quite enough. And so started looking at sort of what else could be done. We had a good engagement where some people proposed using the industrial zone, right? A good, really well put together proposal for that, and sort of ran through that with some other thoughts on how to, whether it's a smaller area or someplace. Oh, another meeting that we had, I forgot, was sort of just trying to get hearing loudly that the mixed residential really wasn't what was preferred, but trying to get some input on, okay, if we don't do that, what else, right? So that's when we started looking at, some different alternatives. I think in the meeting that sort of brought us through to the meeting that we had in June, where Andrew had worked some and had a consultant to do some different analysis on those concepts that had come up in early May. Yeah. So, right, because it takes a while to do some of this stuff. So, and then I think what I'm looking at here, right, is another iteration with some more input from what we heard in that June meeting. So, right, there's a concept of software development. I'm not a software developer, right? Where you like iterate and iterate and iterate, in a spiral until you get to what is the answer. And I think that's where we're sort of where this, or to me that feels like where it's going, is we try this, we try that, and see getting sort of closer to something that is I'm going to say acceptable to bring to town meeting, right? That doesn't mean town meeting's going to vote yes on it, but right, what I know this board has always said is it's our job to get something to town meeting, that if town meeting passes, that we could all live with, and it's town meeting's decision on whether they want to pass that or not. So I think that's a good summary of how we got to where we are. I don't know, feel free to chime in on anything else.
I had some comments on the individual maps, which are tough to read.
But did you have some questions on?
Did the industrial proposal survive in one of these scenarios that were distributed?
Is it concept 3? Is that the
Eastern Gateway?
Yeah,
Yes.
that one is extremely hard to read, like the
can't
brown
tell what's
color
in and
is
what's
not
Yeah.
visible.
Yeah.
It was hard to tell if that was like a background color or if that was supposed to be indicative of something.
So if you could bump that
Yeah.
contrast up,
Yeah.
that would be much appreciated.
Yeah, I think the industrial concept that as was developed, as was really big. I mean, bigger than anyone in town really wants to accept. So, which is why it got modified, but it's still, my understanding is still sort of the same flavor.
It's,
It seems to me, just using that as a point, that there's three focus points that we need to look at. Do we want small developments, like a single-family home being expanded into a duplex, well, a quad or something like that? Do we want, then there's the middle ground, and then there's the big ground. Do we want the 50-unit complex? In my view, and I can change it, but the 50-unit complex is going to be built fast. It'll be financed by venture capitalists. They'll have the money to do it, and they'll do it fast. I am gathering that the town would favor more on the slow side. Either, the residential development into a quad or maybe something a little bit bigger than that. That's what gives me a little bit of a problem with the industrial complex that we've got there. But specifically, if I go through it, I'm just jumping out on concept one. We're creating units of 2030.
So actually, can I interrupt
ahead,
you?
you can.
Right. So we want. I don't want this meeting to be right, because people at home, they don't have this information. I don't want this meeting to be a preview and a board discussion about these concepts, because I don't think that's fair, right? Because we need to move along with the people that come to the meeting, right, in the end of July. So I'd rather that I know I want to jump into this too. I would rather we take this, we think about it, offer stuff like you did, right? Like, how can this be presented better, but not really deliberate on it, because I think I'd rather wait to deliberate on this after we present it and we get more feedback on it than have this board just deliberate in this room. I don't mean to take that as
no, that's
a,
fine.
just
I
a
didn't,
process.
I didn't intend to deliberate. I intended to hopefully focus the outside independence to narrow a little bit what they're doing. But I can live with anything.
Right.
Just a procedural question. To what degree does the settled concept, whatever that may be, is subject to revision or alteration subsequently? In other words, ideally, there's a proposal that town meeting will consider and vote on. Is that to say that's in concrete, or is that to say that it can be amended in the future if circumstances require?
Well, from my perspective, what I understand, right now, there have been 3 towns, 3 municipalities in the Commonwealth whose zones have been approved by EOHED.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes. Salem, Lexington, and somewhere else on the North Shore-ish. Oh, was it Brookline maybe? That's not the North Shore, but anyhow, those I know Salem and Lexington were 2 of them. And I bring that up, John, because Lexington, they approved it with conditions, and the conditions were really interesting in my view. They said 2 things. One is that if the town institutes any historic preservation requirements after the fact that have the effect of minimizing the density that they can achieve in their approved zone below the 15 units per acre, then they would be deemed non-compliant. That's item one. And then item two was there was a zone that that was approved by town meeting or town. Do they have town meeting? Whatever. Right. It was approved by whoever approves it in Lexington, and that zone was identified as not contributing to their compliance because of some certain aspect, right? And sort of the details aren't important. What's important is that the state was going and picking out, like, not looking at it in total, first of all, like, oh, that doesn't work and that does, but also looking at sort of a retro, clawback approval, where if you go back and change something that make it approved by a special permit or some process, then the state's gonna
Yeah, I could interpret that as if a change is made that frustrates the purpose of the original decision, the state will step in. If
yes.
the alteration is neutral to the purpose and simply a change in intent, to what degree can a proposal be altered after a vote at town meeting? Again, probably with another vote at town meeting.
I think that
Procedurally, I'd
yeah.
be interested to know that, because I think to the degree you have a chance to amend, correct, deal with oversights, unforeseen conditions,
Yeah.
feedback, you get a second bite of the apple.
Well, would it still need to be any change to it, still need to be approved by the state? Has that
So,
been laid out
zoning's a
enough?
living document, right?
Yeah.
You
Right.
will learn through whatever its intended desires are as buildings and forms come online, how we can improve that. And then subsequently, if we wish to amend that specific zoning district or two at a later period in time, it will go through an AG review process, town meeting process, and I guess how those changes impact your compliance metrics, they would look at. But if it's more language based or other controls that don't knock you out in or out of compliance, they would run through that determination.
So a
So-
comparison was like 40R, when
Yes.
when town meeting voted to nominate, to change that. I think before it went to town meeting, there was like a provisional review, I don't remember
Yeah.
saying, and the
Yes.
state said,
Yeah.
yes, you would still
Yeah.
comply.
They have like,
And when town meeting voted for something different, it had to go back to the state to make sure that that was still qualified for all of the benefits of having the 40R overlay
Well,
district, right?
in fact, right, every zoning change that we
Every zoning
that we
change.
make has to go to the state to review and approve.
I
So-
get all the boilerplate, but
Yeah.
this is unprecedented. This is a decision for the ages. That is, it'll be binding for generations to come. To the degree it can be revisited and without frustrating its purpose, altered, I think it gives some sense of comfort that you could, if there's an oversight by this group or any other group, you have a chance to remedy it, not live with it.
Well, in any zoning, you have a
Any-
chance to go
yeah.
back.
But
and
this
redo
one,
it.
I'm curious if this one has the same ability to do, or is it prohibited?
I haven't seen anything
I
that
haven't either.
says that you can't go back and modify
Yeah,
it.
there's
Zoning.
nothing that says it's permanent.
Yeah.
It has to meet, if you're doing it, this town would still have to be MBTA communities, right, is a law. So any zoning change that we make would would still have to keep the town on the whole in compliance with MBTA communities. So we set zones for this, if we change them, that would probably, I'm just guessing, but please confirm, that when the state reviews any updated bylaw, that would become part of their review, is are they falling out of compliance with this law among many other laws?
Right, I mean, like, it's kind of like what we just did with the Eastern Gateway a few years ago, right? Or like that Main Street where we, redid the zoning there, and now if we choose one of these maps, we'll be redoing that zoning as well. Again, right? Is that a true statement, right? Didn't we just, a few years ago?
yeah, there's
Yeah.
no map changes in any
Right.
of our recent zoning amendments, but virtually my understanding is that yes,
Yeah.
future amendments will just be subject to review of compliance standards and the zoning enforcement of it in and of itself and zoning allowances.
Yeah, and you make a really good point though, that if folks are feeling like the permanence, the novelty combined with perceived permanence of this is a scary thing, that's reasonable. We could do a better job of making that clear that this becomes zoning and like anything else, it can change. And we still, whatever Reading does has to be in compliance with this law as it exists at any time.
So I'm not so sure I'd take any comfort from the general practices of zoning, although it may be true. This is so novel, I'd be curious to go back and actually say for this specific act, if a compliant plan is submitted and approved, can a subsequent compliant revision be made? And will it be reviewed as if it were a fresh submittal? Or no, they have the right to say, we know it's compliant, we simply disagree. It's compliant from the zoning perspective, it doesn't frustrate the purpose, but you don't have a right to go resubmit because you've already given us your submittal. It's so holistic, it's hard.
Yeah, that would be a dramatic change in state
It would
law.
be, it would be, yeah.
And there's nothing in MBTA communities that changes that aspect of state law of being able to update your zoning.
I'm not an expert in state law, I'd just be curious, this is a big one, so is this one treated the same as the little ones?
That's a good point.
I can do some more research, see if we can find and ask the
Is
question,
that a question for town council?
either council or the state.
Just a question for the state probably, right?
I can envision the state basically saying you're free to make some changes. Hypothetically, if you wanted to go from 3-story to 4-story yourself.
But you're kind of making my point for me, Tom, which is I don't want to envision
I know.
anything, I want to know what the truth is.
Well, I think the truth might be partway in between. If the Commonwealth were to take the position that all zoning lies with the Commonwealth, then you're up.
Yeah, I mean, zoning is never absolute, ever, right? There is
Right.
never, right? We can't live in a world where a decision you made in, 1890 stays forever, right? So, in terms of land use, so there needs to be some flexibility to change zoning. But, the way that the state views that will be important. It'll absolutely be important, because if they do see it as, if they want to make it rigid, they can make all our lives pretty difficult. So it's a good question.
It's a good thing to keep
Yeah.
in mind, yeah.
Yeah.
That might be a good question to put to town council if they have an easy answer.
Well, the other thought in the back of my head is, there's an old saying, don't be a pioneer, because pioneers get to be the test cases. Right? So to the degree you can have a simple proposal that's later amendable, you have a chance of saying, okay, we saw how it happened, we get a chance to change our minds and still be compliant.
Yeah.
Enough said.
I have a question about, I can use refresher on the time frame of key decisions that then this board needs to make, right? We have the meeting on July 31st that will go over these scenarios, and I realize we still need to give you any input on how those scenarios can be really clear. And then there's an August meeting also, right? It is August. No, it's not August yet. Okay.
Yeah, there's no specific MBTA communities forum in August yet.
That's just a regular August meeting.
We're tentatively holding some ideas, but just need, it's seeing how this conversation goes and where this
Okay.
how we narrow the view, right? And that can quickly either evolve right into a bylaw, or do we need to do a bit more workshopping with the community? So that's kind of what
Thank you, because this is why I'm asking. I'm remembering that the one that was canceled before was the second of third, and now we have the third where we'll review these scenarios. And then by process, does the board then need to make a decision on which option we're pursuing and build bylaws around that? And in terms of the time frame, in order to get to November town meeting, you shared something before where it was like backing it out to the writing time. is there anything that we need to have kind of pre-approved by the state or anything like that, depending on
We
scenarios?
don't need to have anything pre-approved by the state. We, in all likelihood, are looking to submit our draft bylaw to the state in September for their review and try to get that guidance hopefully earlier than to November town meeting. But the dates we need to be cognizant of are the warrant closing date of what I believe is September 27th, and our public hearing, whether that's 1, 2, or 3 hearings, just needs to be closed by that date.
Which date is September?
September 27th, I believe, is the date to close.
So we're getting close.
We are getting close.
So are you anticipating that, like, at our next meeting after the public forum, we're making a decision on which
Yes.
scenario
Yes.
or which strategy to pursue? I'm gonna just call it
And whether
strategy.
that's a 1 or 2 option, we will discuss.
Wait, say that again, at which meeting were you talking
Our
about?
August meeting.
Sometime in August, whether that's your standard August 15th meeting or we hold another.
Yes.
Okay,
Now, I still do
that's
have,
important. Okay.
I still have a question on scenario concept number 2. There's a box. Where does the box go? The lower right-hand corner.
Oh, that is
Oh.
the
That is
north, the where Home Goods is,
Yeah.
up north of, in the north part of town.
No, off the map.
Yes.
Okay.
so it's just a little insert.
Oh, I see.
Maybe put street names in there so
Yeah,
folks
that's
have
not
to
on
know
there
that's
either.
what you're talking about.
Can-
Mm-hmm.
Can I just say in terms of like accessibility, in terms of legibility,
Mm-hmm.
I would take the color of the underlying map and turn it black and white and gray, completely gray it out, because all the colors are reading like,
Yeah, we are building local
Yeah.
maps.
Yeah,
Oh,
they're
right,
like-
these are the RKG maps, and
Yeah.
you're doing it on your, on
Yes.
but
our system.
yeah,
Yes.
bold and colorful
Yeah.
of what we want people to look at, and
Mhm.
they're really, really difficult to read.
Mhm.
And remove extraneous information,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that density denominator deductions. A
Mhm.
lot of people might just ignore that because they don't know what it is.
Mhm.
Some people might just really get bogged down in something like that, and
Mhm.
yeah, so if it's not necessary, I wouldn't include it.
It's just, yeah, I've seen them enough and still, I'm like, what are we looking at?
So, a couple things. One, I don't know if all you got a chance to look at the, I don't know what it was called, like some online.
That was the other thing I
System,
wanted to
yeah.
mention,
That was
yeah.
very
Um,
cool.
I found that really interesting to play around a little bit on, what parcel sizes were that would be compliant, that you could actually do something with under the law, which ones, where parcels that had been developed, you pick your date on
Mhm.
which, where is it unlikely to be redeveloped, 2000, 2010, like, last year, are they gonna not, right? And so you can start to really visualize which parcels within different scenarios are really potential for redevelopment. And I think also important is which of the different concepts are likely to result in more development or less. I don't even want to say more or less development, more change or less change. And I found that to be really worthwhile
Yeah.
to help. Because I think these maps, right, when we put up maps, they're static and it's a blob.
Yeah.
The two things that I have a problem with, I mean, I look at this stuff all the time. I can translate a zone to a form
Mhm.
and, some setback to what it might mean. People
Mhm.
yeah, so, right, I think that part of what I hope we can do during that next meeting is help that discussion on what does the blob mean, right? And what does a zone, right? We're all sort of guessing, because you don't know for certain. Every parcel you can do something different on, but what's it likely to result in, right? I mean, as Tom was saying, like some are going to be, 5-story multifamily houses, and some are going to be, you could only get on the bulk of it, 4 units, right? Sort of like helping that discussion than just like where is a zone and what's the total number, I think is helpful to the discussion.
Yeah, and I think we similarly learned over the public hearing process that the static maps do cause some elements of confusion, so where they can kind of be adjusted in this visualizer of the zoom in, zoom out, macro, micro level should hopefully be helpful for many. It's broken into 2 pieces where it shows virtually what exists today, both non-conforming uses, but also within that, it even shows what the zoning allowances are today in terms of a maximum build on a lot is versus the proposed controls, which hopefully aren't too substantially different. And that I thought was one of the coolest pieces to kind of project in terms of maximum build out in dwelling size, right, or form size, building size, versus the proposal, which I think is extremely helpful, and hopefully people can find that in there. There are a lot of toggles and things to work through, but that's the way it had to kind of work out in terms of playing with the potential change, right? So
I have a question about that also, because I also found that to be a very cool tool, and I may or may not be interpreting what I'm seeing there correctly, especially hearing what you just said, that the existing scenario should the build out, and what we need to be doing is finding nearly 1,500. We need to be finding zoning for nearly 1,500 new units. So my question is this: in that, in what is it called? In the scenario thing, the scenario explorer, there was a scenario for downtown, and I am wondering, and in the materials you gave us of potential scenarios, there's not a downtown only, it's always combined with something else. The question is there a feasible scenario that the public should be considering that is downtown only? Knowing that that would involve rezoning 40R.
That's a great question. The only way that it works is that pre-model that was in June, right? Which is to get the density and unit capacity there, you need to allow the multifamily at a 4-story level rather than a 3-story as it's written today in these evolved concepts. So the 4-story at multifamily only did not seem too inclined to what we heard as less commercial impact or loss of commercial impact. So we had taken that off of the table in these latest concepts because I don't think there's an intent to ever go to 5 stories. I know Postmark has some element of a 5th story, but
Tell me this, Andrew, can you revisit the regulations specifically with R40R as they play with MBTA communities, right? What would we, for the downtown in terms of percentage wise, what would we be allowed to keep versus, and how does that play with the densities you were just talking about? Meaning, let me ask a little bit cleaner. You say to get the density, we would need, essentially 4-story residential, right? If we're allowed to have 20%, I don't know if that's the right number, if we're allowed to have 20% affordable units, does that mean that just adds to the height requirements, or that's not an easy answer?
It's not an easy answer, but the controls and the affordability, I guess the affordability most specifically in 40R does not factor into the controls in density because we're allowed to keep it as higher percentage requirements without a review. So those affordability requirements do not impact the density necessary per lot or per zone.
Okay. Okay.
But I think where we're trying to go is maximize the density of what the 3-story gets you in terms of unit capacity and density, so that it is as it exists today. And even those densities that we're looking at to maximize those 3 stories are below the dwellings per acre that existing developments sit at. So that was the intent.
It makes me think that for the presentation on the 31st, it would be valuable to clearly and concisely explain, the evolution from without revisiting the scenarios that you did at the library, but maybe revisiting the input that you heard and how that's informing the scenarios that are out there. That point that you made just now is a really important one, for instance.
Yeah, and the other point we heard was affordable units, and using downtown to maintain the 20 to 25% gets you your highest percentage of affordable units, I should say.
Yeah. So, I know there was a lot of input and there was a lot of frustration at that meeting, but yeah, kind of feeding back to people what you heard, and then and to the extent that you can, kind of considerations and how that's informing these 5, I think will help us keep moving forward.
Other thoughts or comments without going into the details of the proposals? Right, and I would say, I'm gonna, if you don't, right, already, right, as a board, right, when you're looking through material or have questions, I know, I've gone to Andrew a number of times, what does this mean, how would this work, what are how do the numbers crunch, as I try and wrap my head around it is helpful, so.
I have one other question, and it has to do with timing. Has to do with conflict of interest and kind of the time in our board's deliberations. When I was on, it's always been on my mind knowing that at some point we'll need to know, are we rezoning more or less than 10% of the town, right? Because for planning board conflicts of interest, if we're rezoning about like 10% or less of the town, people who own property within the zone need to kind of disclose that and get approval from the appointing board, which is the select board, to deliberate or not. And so it's been on my mind, and it's some of us have been in and out and whatnot. But what I also noticed on the scenario planner is that all of the scenarios in the scenario planner are less than 10% of the land. So if you are feeling like, okay, we're going towards something that is less than 10% of the land, it feels like this board should know that, so that before our August meeting, before we deliberate, anybody who needs to can do the disclosure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's a
I'll
good point.
double check that
Yeah.
on any new concepts, but it feels like we've lessened the area even below what was in June.
Right, so that
Which
makes that
is me.
even more important, that
Which
if
puts us
you,
to that
yeah,
threshold of
if you're in that
disclosure.
threshold, then you really need to disclose that.
In that calculation, it's 10% of what?
10% of the town.
10% of
25
the
square
land.
miles, 10%.
Like,
Whether it's wetlands, undevelopable, under the water.
That's, yeah. I mean, and it is a fairly, so the process, it's laid out in the conflict of interest rules, but you you disclose that to the appointing board, which for us is the select board, saying, yeah, I own property in this zone. And you don't necessarily need to recuse yourself, you have to let them know, and I think you need to make it known at the meeting.
I believe so.
So it's right, because it could be that, I mean, it's feasible that, a quorum of the board is, has property in the zone. I don't think that's the case, but
Yeah, and the language, I don't know if it's 10% of the land or 10% of the parcels, and I know that both of them are given there. The language is that, it's about the employees, ours, financial interest, whether or not it is shared with a substantial portion, 10% or more of the town's population. So one could argue, you should get probably counsel, if we're below 10% of like the parcels, we should get a decision about whether or not we need to anybody needs to disclose. I just don't want to put the whole process in
It's
jeopardy.
another thing for town council to weigh on a 10% of what.
Good question and good clarification, definitely.
all right. On to meeting minutes.
Yeah, look at this.
You can vote on meeting minutes even if you weren't there.
Yep.
I just have one comment, and I actually can't figure out what that sentence means. So, I mean, the sentence is written okay, but I'm not sure what actually happened. On the last paragraph on page 2, it says in about the middle of the paragraph, board members feel that the proof plan is not working, then the applicant could look to waive the 30-foot curve roundings.
I don't think that's what we said.
I think that's what you said, yeah. I think it was almost the opposite.
I
You could
think-
not look to waive it if you don't meet the requirements.
Yeah, I mean, I think we were saying that the proof plan is not working. And that we weren't supportive of waiving the 30-foot curve roundings if the proof plan wasn't working.
And that's what it says later on in the paragraph there.
Okay, great.
The gist of it, and I just was not sure what was said that caused that.
Yeah.
I mean, someone said something, right?
Right.
Like,
Okay.
um,
Yeah, no, that's very confusing.
so I guess my I don't know.
Well, you could end it, that the plan is not working, period, and then just pick up with the next sentence.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's kind of inconsequential to the
Yeah.
other part.
I'm only noting one on page 4 where it says Mr. Macknick will open up for public comment. Mr. West.
What was that, Andrew?
On page 4, snap in the middle, one sentence, paragraph, says Mr. Macknick will open it up for public comment. We're just gonna change that to Weston.
Yeah.
And I'm just noticing something on page 6, in the second paragraph. Mr. Duretsa's name is spelled incorrectly. Wait, hold on, that says page 6 on mine, let me,
Yeah, that's right.
and it's looking different from yours.
It's the
Two
paragraph above.
paragraphs up.
Yeah.
Um,
Keep going up.
There we go.
When I was reading through just before the meeting on page 5 as well, under the 246 Walnut Plan endorsement, just wanted to maybe clarify that a bit, so I modified the sentence to what's on screen.
Oh.
Hillary Klish.
Oh.
It's either
It's one or the other of us.
That one we can
Oh,
double
so it's
check, yeah.
probably not.
I don't know who it was.
I was remote that day, so it was probably
Yeah.
not.
Oh, it's,
Yeah,
yes, it was probably
yes.
me, yeah.
It's Hillary.
Here's another Derezo Diazero on
no.
page 8, just before the adjournment. There it is.
Anything else from anyone? Good. Nope.
I have a question about MBTA.
Oh, we're looking for a motion to, for the.
I'll move to
minutes.
approve the minutes from June 10th, 2024.
I'll second that.
All those in favor? No, abstaining? All right. Any other news,
No,
topics, planning
no,
topics? All
I
right,
don't think so.
all right.
My question is for your breakout groups for
Yeah.
the session, are you gonna have facilitators per groups? Are people lined up to
Yeah.
facilitate groups?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I should have noted, we do not require you to help facilitate this discussion.
It's okay if so, is that that could be a lot of groups, and so I was interested about that.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
definitely, my biggest heartburn is hopefully there's just the capacity for those. Right, not having the hybrid allowance and trying to fit the tables in the rooms. We can fit 3 to 4 for large table discussions. Hopefully that's enough to get everybody into themselves.
Okay.
All right.
Motion to adjourn.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Thank you all.
Thank you.